What is going on, Hive Warriors? It's your boy Edward V, and today we're going to talk about a study that shows that the alertness and awareness of a human does indeed increase when intermittent fasting. Stay tuned. A lot of people who do intermittent fasting love to say, hey, I don't know if I'm getting more energy. I don't think I am. And I don't know if I'm getting this benefit, and I don't know if I'm getting that benefit. And they say these things because, one, they don't actually get the empirical evidence of it happening or the blood or the testing of what's going on in their bodies. They just say they don't feel it, so that's enough for them to say that they don't think it's happening. However, they also like to touch on the fact that most of these studies haven't been done on humans. A lot of these studies have been done on animals. And although a lot of the argument from the intermittent fasting community does come from studies that happen to animals, a lot of times when they take those animal studies and finally convert them to human studies, we are proven to be correct. And recently a new study was published, and in this study they actually used human subjects to prove that your alertness and awareness increases. Now I'm going to set some basic parameters for you to understand this study, because I don't want it to get lost in all of these scientific words. I want you to understand exactly what I'm talking about, which is the base of everything I do for this channel. I want this to be as clear and concise as possible so you guys can retain the information and use it to your advantage. So a new neurotransmitter has been detected in the body that correlates to awakeness and alertness. This neurotransmitter is called Orexin-A. There's Orexin-A and Orexin-B, but you don't need to know about Orexin-B because that has nothing to do with this study. Orexin-A is what they're looking at. They want to see if it's elevated, if it's consistently elevated when you're fasting, but then consistently not as elevated when you're not fasting. That will show that you actually have more alertness and awakeness when you're doing intermittent fasting over when you're eating. So they used 8 male subjects for this study, and they didn't use women subjects, not because males are better than women when it comes to intermittent fasting, but they wanted to control every single outside element that they can. Even light, food, sleep patterns, and menstrual cycles can throw off the Orexin-A numbers. And because inevitably multiple menstrual cycles would have happened in this study, they opted not to include women. It was 8 men, and they used the protocol of Ramadan to go ahead and do this as effectively as possible. And let me just say one thing. During Ramadan, or before Ramadan, or after Ramadan, using Ramadan participants has to be the best, smartest thing you can do when doing studies for intermittent fasting. One, because you know that they are much more likely to complete it and not fall out. And also you will get a much more accurate study because they are more likely to actually do the full Ramadan fast because they're doing it for religious purposes. Other studies that I find to be sketchy are the alternate day fasting, where they just take participants that have no interest in doing intermittent fasting, have never done it before, and they get a big chunk of people quit, and others that you're not even sure if they fully did the intermittent fasting experience. Plus, alternate day fasting allows you to eat up to 500 calories on the times that you're fasting, so it's not that good of a platform for a study. Ramadan participants during Ramadan or right before Ramadan is perfect. So to any university or scientist or medical industry, if you're going to do intermittent fasting studies and you want it to be more accurate, please keep on sticking with the Ramadan participants. So let's move further into this study. So with this study, they had 8 healthy men. They were from the ages of 20 to 30. The mean, which is the middle range between all of them, was about 24.5 years old. So they try to get it as mixed and as even as possible. As to not affect the Orexin-A, if you were a smoker, you were eliminated. If you drank alcohol, you were eliminated. If you had a sleeping disorder, you were eliminated. If you worked the night shift, because your body wants to sleep during the day and be awake at night, so that throws the numbers off. So if they had anyone who worked night shift and they signed up, they were excluded, and someone else was put in that position to ensure that all these people did not have any of those elements. Once they had that in place, they used 3 separate controls for this study. They tested them on a week before Ramadan. They tested them while allowing them to eat as much as they like and just have a normal diet, which was also before Ramadan. And then they tested them on the Ramadan time frame. Now, because there are certain things that you have to eat, or the certain kind of lifestyle you have to have during Ramadan, they wanted to try to do a simulation before that so they can control the lifestyle change, you know, the food patterns, the sleep patterns. That's why they did it before Ramadan, and that's why they did it during Ramadan as well. And I know you want to know what the results were, so I'm going to actually put up the graph that they put up themselves. This is the graph right here. Now, if you look at this graph, you're going to see a lot of things that might not make sense. Orexin-A elevation is going up, and there's 3 different color lines here. The red line is the baseline control where they ate normally, they did not fast during this time. The blue line is the simulated Ramadan, which is fasting before Ramadan, and the green line is fasting during Ramadan. Now look how close these lines are to each other, the green and the blue. Even with the different lifestyle that they have when doing Ramadan, it still wasn't drastic enough to make this completely go berserk. The benefits were still there. On the bottom, you'll see these white arrows and you'll see these dark black arrows. The dark black arrows are what they were eating during the Ramadan phase and the simulated Ramadan phase. Those are the times that they actually had their meals, and the white arrows is the times that they had their meals during the phase where they were not doing intermittent fasting. And the dark and white lines on the bottom, the dark line represent when they were sleeping, the white line represents when they were awake. And the one on the top was during the intermittent fasting time frame, and the one on the bottom was during their non-intermittent fasting time frame. You can see in the non-fasting period, they wake up, eat something, and still their energy level doesn't go up. Their Orexin-A still stays stagnant at a very low level. It then starts to increase really, really fast. They get a few more meals in, and then a few hours right before they start to go to sleep, it already starts to drop. So they only get a rise once throughout the entire time frame. If you look at the fasting time frame, which is the green and the blue line for the Ramadan and the non-Ramadan time frame fasting, you'll see that it's already elevated by the time that they wake up, and it only drops super quick during the time when they actually finally start eating, as you can see with the dark arrows below. They then go back into not eating and it starts to rise again. They eat one more time within like a 2:30 to 3 o'clock in the morning time frame, pre-dawn Ramadan feeding stage, and then they go back to fasting. But notice how it still doesn't drop, and then when they wake back up the next day, it's still at that high level. Not only is their Orexin-A levels high for most of the days, unlike the normal dietary feeding time frame, it actually goes much higher than when they were not intermittent fasting and just normally eating throughout the day. Keep in mind that this study was only done with 8 participants and all of them were men, so there are some limitations in that conclusion, but this was the hypothesis that was taken directly from what happened with animals, put onto the human using specific control protocols, and this was the outcome that they got. A significant increase in Orexin-A, which is the neurotransmitter for high awakeness and alertness. So this is how they can actually measure the fight or flight system that happens in your body when you're not eating. So for all those people that say, I can't do intermittent fasting because it zaps my energy, this study just proved you wrong. Because according to this study, you actually increase in energy and alertness and awakeness when you're intermittent fasting. Now, there's a difference between being in a withdrawal because you're not used to fasting and your body wants to eat, so you feel miserable during that time frame where you're trying to get acclimated to intermittent fasting. But to flat out say that you have no energy is just you allowing that feeling of withdrawal to overtake your thought process. Believe it or not, for all the naysayers out there, intermittent fasting does indeed increase your alertness. And of course, I want to thank my patrons for my Patreon, and I'm going to put their names right up here. And I'll see you guys on Sunday for another FAQ. Peace!